Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Black Mental Wellness Lounge. I'm Brandon Johnson. This is Black Youth Suicide Prevention Week, and this is day 4 at this point. So we've been pushing stuff out. Hopefully, you've been tapped into the infographics, the other videos that have come out so far. We've covered suicide prevention research for Black youth. We've covered specifically looking at the way stories and our platforms can be used to help our young people, and even getting connected to some community-based organizations that are doing this work. And so I hope you're connected. Instagram, Black Mental Wellness Lounge. You can see all the infographics that are coming out as a part of that. Hopefully you're tapped in. I want to thank all the people who took time to do inspirational videos throughout this week on behalf of this week for our kids. And so I'm excited about it. This is cool. So we got today and tomorrow, and then we're wrapping up. And so tonight I want to get into this conversation around getting care for our kids, how to advocate for our kids, and really talk about this issue of racism that continues to be ingrained in a lot of our systems, that our young people face, that our parents trying to get care oftentimes will face, and how to navigate that. It can be a big stressful thing, especially on top of trying to get care for your child. And so today I have the honor and the privilege of having my good new buddy with me, Dr. Amanda Calhoun. Welcome to the Black Mental Wellness Lounge.
Thank you so much for having me, Brandon. It's an honor to be here. Just to introduce myself, my name is Amanda Calhoun. I'm an adult and child psychiatrist at Yale, and I do a lot of work with children in the hospital. I also work with children outside of the hospital as well, but my focus is really on working with Black children and dealing with the mental health effects of racism in our Black youth.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, first we want to thank you for your work. You know, being in those spaces, being a Black woman in those spaces. I'm sure that comes with enough stuff on top of it.
Whew, yeah.
I can imagine. So we just want to say thank you on behalf of the lounge, just of the work that you do advocating for our kids and families each and every day. So thank you so much for that. And so you gave us a perfect segue, right? You're talking about, like, this intersection of our mental health, specifically in our community, our kids, and experiences around racism. And so, for those who don't know, who may be watching and just saying, like, yeah, there's probably, some effects of that, but, like, what does, what kind of impact can experiencing racism have on our kids?
Yeah. So when I think about that, I think of it in two big buckets. And this is even just simplifying it, but one being the racism that Black children go through before they get to the hospital. So, meaning before they get to, mental health care, not just, a psychiatric hospital, but it could be before they can see a psychiatrist or anything like that. So before that, or even for kids that don't have psychiatric illnesses, mental illness, there's the racism that they're experiencing just by being a Black child in
Mhm.
America. Then you have the added level of our children that develop or have mental illness or mental health things that they're struggling with,
Mhm.
and on top of that are experiencing racism in the mental health care system when they do access care, just trying to get mental health care. So those things are very much intertwined, but they can also be separate too. So when I think about the effects in general of anti-Black racism on our children, it's actually something that I'm studying.
Mm.
But I think of the impact of racism as a sort of trauma. And so when a person, a child, but it could be an adult, experiences trauma, so it could be a traumatic incident or it could be, a number of traumatic incidents,
Mhm.
it has sort of a splintering effect. And when I think of that, imagine literally sort of a burst of splinters that go in all different directions. So
Yeah.
you never know what's going to happen when you experience these traumatic incidents. It could lead to depressive symptoms, so feeling sad, down, irritable, like you're you feel worthless. Those types of things could lead to anxiety type symptoms, meaning you just feel you worry about everything. The child worries about going into situations with a lot of white people. They worry about, and adults, and they worry about, how am I going to be treated? Am I going to
Mhm.
be accepted? That type of thing. And then in that type of worry, I don't just mean a sort of normal amount of worry. So because we all worry, I mean
Right.
worry to the point where they can't leave the house or they're not able to go about their daily life. And then sort of more of almost PTSD like symptoms. So being very like on edge all the time,
Mhm.
sort of in
Yeah.
fight or flight mode, that type of thing. Um, and then, even substance use. So,
Yeah.
racism can affect children in all those different ways. Also, eating habits. So, it
Mhm.
can lead to disordered eating, eating too much, not eating enough. So, when I think of racism, I think you experience it over and over and over, and it has this burst of effects, and you never know which one you're going to get, and you may not get any of them. So, some of us experience racism and we do not develop mental health issues. We develop other things, and it does wear on us as far as stress level, but it maybe never gets to a point where a child or a person is thinking about suicide. But for some people, they may experience racism and it may get to the point where they start considering suicide. So you never know what you're going to get, and it depends on the child and the person and how they respond to racism. And so that's kind of how I conceptualize racism, anti-black racism for our kids right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that's a really good, that's a really good breakdown of that. And there's so many different, pieces that are connected to that because there's direct, experiences with racism, and there's also the vicarious experiences that our young people face. And I was reading something maybe a couple of months ago that really talked about young people and young adults who were African American and Latinx who looked at what they call traumatic events online. So basically like George Floyd's video, Freddie
Mhm.
Gray, Fernando Castillo, those type of things. And
Mhm.
the people who look at it more often consistently were more likely to have depressive and PTSD symptoms such as you talked about.
Mhm. And I think an added layer to that is when we look at white people, they don't experience those symptoms after
Hmm.
watching black people get murdered, which,
Right.
says something else, right? So, we are uniquely being affected. And I think, while while we do have similarities with sort of the non-black Latinx, non-African descent Latinx population, I
Yeah.
would say the Black experience is quite unique in this country, similar to their experience is unique in that, there's a long history of us being
Yeah.
in this country and being at the bottom of the racial hierarchy that was
Yeah.
created by white people. And, when it was initially, when it was initially created, white was the best and black was the worst, and
Absolutely.
everybody else fell in between. So,
Yeah.
there's a special type of hellish experience, I will say, of how we've been treated as black people, and we have
Yeah.
been so resilient. I wish we didn't have to be resilient, but black people have been so resilient in how we've been able to still achieve and overcome. And when thinking about children and tying it into youth, it's amazing how much racism black children experience, and they
Mhm.
still are kind, are trying to work hard, are trying to do well, even when they have all these strikes against them. They might be severely depressed. They might be, dealing with things at home on top of racism. So there,
Absolutely.
while it's such a terrible experience, and I think we should acknowledge that, things are not great. We aren't treated great, and we have a lot of work to do as far as getting to a point where I think black people are treated how they deserve.
Yeah.
Also highlighting just there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of opportunity for us to be able to intervene with our youth and with our children to help them be able to navigate these challenges and still be able to not just survive but thrive.
Absolutely. And a lot of that takes us being able to listen and be present, and be supportive, right? And we'll
Yes.
get to that in a bit, but it really does take that when they have these experiences. And so when we talk about these experiences, we talked about that, the first bucket that you outlined. And so as it pertains to healthcare and behavioral healthcare, when
Hmm.
we talk about racism with our kids in those systems, from your experiences and the work that you do, like how can that look, right? Because some people may have experienced it, and sometimes you may experience it, and it's just like, was that what I thought it was? Like, was that that thing, right? Whether it's yourself, whether it's in a parent role, but like how does that kind of manifest in those settings from your experience?
Yeah. So I'll talk first about outside of the hospital and then
Mhm.
in the hospital, because I
Sure.
think, outpatient mental health care is going to be kind of one category, and then inside the hospital, right? Because inside the hospital, you as a parent, as a Black parent, don't see everything that's happening with your child because they're on a locked
Mm,
inpatient facility. So that's a whole
sure.
different level of that we'll talk about in a second. So with outpatient mental health care, racism, um, it definitely can appear as just this sort of uneasy feeling in your gut. So as a parent, if you're bringing your child in, 9 times out of 10, your psychiatrist, your therapist is going to be somebody white. Just
Yeah.
because, as a Black woman, I make up less than 2% of psychiatrists. So the chances you're going to see someone who looks like me
Wow.
is low. And which is
Wow.
why, we need Black people in the mental health care field.
Yes.
Whole another thing. So if you're watching
Yes.
this and you're thinking about psychiatry or you're thinking about mental health field, let's connect, because we need more Black people. But that's an aside. So the first thing is, if you're bringing your child in and you've managed to access mental health care, it's going to be likely somebody white.
Hmm.
So those interactions between this mental health care professional and your child, the mental health care professional and you, are really important. So if you as a Black parent are not feeling like you're being listened to,
Hmm.
if you feel that you're being talked down to, or your child feels like they're being talked down to, that's something to really listen to,
Yeah.
because kids know and kids will tell
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
if you ask them, and sometimes even if you don't ask them.
Right.
So kids may come out of it saying, "Ooh, I don't like therapy." And so you may have to ask them more questions. Well, why don't you like therapy?
Hmm.
What happened? Give them, if your child is sort of not someone that kind of gives you all that information up front, give them some open-ended questions so that they can tell you more. And
Mm,
if they start saying, "Well, I didn't like the therapist." Sometimes, you know, that actually is, so I should say all the time, that's valid.
yeah.
And sometimes it can be due to racist interactions between the mental health professional and your child, or with you. So the way that I see it manifesting is things like that: talking in a condescending way,
Hmm.
not listening to the parent or the child about certain symptoms that they're having.
Mm,
So, as an example, I had a child who, um, a young Black boy whose behavior was very, it was in line with someone who was essentially developing psychosis. What
okay.
the mom described, the Black mother, was, he's not acting in a way that's normal. He's
Mhm.
talking to himself, like he's acting as if someone's in the room when I know someone's not in the room.
Sure.
Um, he just all these things. She knew something wasn't right, and they told him, your child just has ADHD. Essentially problems with attention and
Yeah.
distraction. That is a disorder, and it does
Yes.
happen. But she was saying, no, there's more to this.
Yeah.
But no one would listen to her in the outpatient setting. That child ended up being hospitalized, which is how I ended up seeing him.
Yeah.
And she finally said to me, "Can you please? Am I crazy? Because I
Mm,
don't think this is just ADHD. I think my child is developing maybe something like schizophrenia in the future. He has multiple
yeah.
people in his family that have schizophrenia or have bipolar disorder. So your family history is important." And I said, "No, this is not ADHD. This is psychosis." And she was like, "Oh my gosh, thank you." So
Right.
that's an example. But if you feel like something is off with your child and you don't feel like the explanation of the diagnosis that the mental health care professional is giving you fits your child, that's a red flag, because they should be listening to you. They should be validating what you're saying. You shouldn't feel like you're walking in and they're making a lot of negative assumptions about you, assuming
Yeah.
that you're uneducated. I'm just throwing some things out there that happen
Sure.
to Black people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or assuming you're uneducated, assuming you don't know what you're talking about, assuming the problem with your child is because of some issue that lies within you.
Right.
Lots of things like that happen on the outpatient, in an outpatient setting. And so I would say to the parents that are watching this, listen to your gut, and do not trust someone just because they're a psychiatrist or a therapist. I always tell my patients and my patients' parents, I don't want you to just trust me automatically. I want you to
Yeah.
trust me because I earned your trust. And you should be able to ask me and challenge me about anything, and I will never be offended, because you asking me questions or you challenging the way I'm thinking about something, we're working together.
Right.
Like, we're partners here. It's not me telling you about your child because you know your child better than I ever will. So for Black parents, trust your gut. If you don't like the way a physician or a therapist is communicating with you, that's all I have to hear, right? Because
Yeah.
that means you're doing something wrong. And if so, I would recommend you bring it up to them. I don't like the way that you're talking to me and talking to my child, and see how they respond. If they respond in a non-defensive way, in a constructive way, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. What
Yeah.
can I do? How can I make you feel more comfortable? That's a good sign. If they respond with anger, defensiveness, retaliation, meaning, you feel like they're now labeling you as a difficult parent, anything like that,
Yeah.
that's a red flag that you need to switch to someone else. So don't be afraid to advocate for yourself and switch to someone else. You can definitely fire doctors, you can fire therapists, and
Say
you
that
need
again. Say that. We need that
to
again.
fire doctors, you can fire therapists. It happens
Love
all the
it.
time, okay? And it's okay. You need to get the best care for your child that you feel comfortable with, because if your child does not feel comfortable in therapy, how are they going to open up about whatever they're dealing with?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, that's so key because as you know, there, especially with us growing up, there's always a lot of this dynamic of, we talk about the patient provider relationship, but for so long we've been taught that we don't know, so we should go with the provider. And so like your line of thinking is really good with getting us to think of like we're the experts of our kids, of our
Yes,
situations. I think that's a really key.
yes, yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. And I think, there is that respect that you have for a mental health professional, or a medical professional. You want to believe that they're in this field because they care about kids, right?
Right.
But the reality is that some mental health care professionals, physicians, doctors, and medical professionals do not value Black children to the extent that they value white children. That's just the
Yeah.
reality. They don't. And they don't because, and it shows itself in their behavior. It shows itself in the fact that the majority of mental health techniques, therapies
Yeah.
that we have are tailored to white children and white
Absolutely.
experiences, not Black experiences. So, no, I don't think that we can trust that just because someone is a teacher, just because someone's a mental health care professional, because they're a doctor. I would love to say I trust all the doctors I work with Black
Yeah.
patients, but I absolutely do not. And
Yeah.
so it's important to be vigilant. It's important to be, just very, very, aware of how you're feeling and how your child is feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all really good points. And so, there could be a situation where this happens and, you know, a young person comes to us and say that they feel like something's happening, or like they're not getting what they need, or you may feel like that, or to the point that our young people, as you described, like you know you feel like they've been wronged, like they've
Mhm,
been mistreated to that point because of their racial identity, because of that. And
mhm,
so as a parent, if you're working with a clinician and like that happens, what should their next steps be? Like, is there a way to, like, should they report it to someone? Should they just look for a new doctor? Like, are there, things that a parent should think about doing if they feel like this has happened? I don't quite know how to respond. Like, I don't know where I should go, what I should do. Do you have any insight about that?
Yeah, so I am very pro reporting.
Okay.
I think that, you know, non-black providers who are engaging in anti-black racism and doing things need to be reported. They need to be held accountable. And I say non-black because unfortunately anti-blackness is real in many people of color communities.
Yeah.
So, if you're feeling like, the first step is sort of like I said, bring it up,
Yeah.
explicitly with the provider. It is possible that the therapist or the psychiatrist made a mistake.
Mhm.
It's possible that I make mistakes where someone will maybe something comes off in a way that is offensive to a patient. But immediately if it's brought to my attention, I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened? Let's talk about this, right?
Right.
So if it's brought up and they're defensive, like what I said, I think that it definitely should be reported. And there's always a reporting mechanism in place.
Yeah.
Usually, I should say almost always. So, I recommend talking to, there's usually like an administrative assistant or a secretary and sort of saying like, I want to leave a review for this person or I want to report something that happened.
Okay.
And there's usually a mechanism through which to do that. I will say if you're staying in the same practice, so sometimes there's like different groups, you should, once you report something, be aware of the downstream effects of that. I'm
Okay.
pro reporting, but I also know that when people get reported, when white people get reported, they can sometimes get very angry about it. And sometimes
Mm.
even other white people associated with those white people can get angry about it. So just be aware, be
Yeah.
on, be on guard, be vigilant. But I do think it should be reported. And I think that if you are, if your child is reporting that, they said something to them that was racist, you're feeling like they're acting in a way that's racist, that's all I need to hear.
Yeah.
That should be reported. And then, yes, finding a different provider. So I think, if you've already tried to talk about it to the provider, and I say provider like therapists,
Hmm.
psychiatrists, and they've gotten defensive, one strike, you're out. Because the first thing they should do is say, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that this happened. I'm so sorry." They should be
Right.
upset, right? Like I'm upset if I offend a patient, right? Like let's say I forget one of my child patients' names or something because I see a lot of children and they're upset by
Yeah.
that and they're mad at me about it. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I forgot."
Right.
I forget people's names sometimes. It's not that I don't care about you. I remember this, and this about you.
Right.
So we have a conversation about it, right? And so if it doesn't seem like a sincere apology and you'll be able to feel that, then I say move on to a different provider for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that that's, more than reasonable because, we're taught in a lot of these spaces to have empathy,
Yes.
right? To be able to, you know, understand that we're not going to get things right all the time, right? And if we're, understanding that and knowing that we're going with our best intentions,
Hmm.
if there is that immediate, adversarial piece that comes up, there's something there, right? There's something that needs to be figured out because, like you said, the appropriate response, if we're leading with empathy, understanding that we're going to make mistakes and be in position to rectify those mistakes, because that's a teachable moment. That's
Yeah.
an opportunity to display empathy, and if it's not there, we may need to transition.
And I mean, I don't think I'm even as nice as you, Brandon, because I see behind the scenes with a
Yeah.
lot of these non-black providers and the way they talk about black patients and families. So
Mm,
I would say bringing up what happened with your child, the racist thing that was said, or that your child
yeah.
felt, or that you felt, for me, isn't about showing them empathy. It's more about me laying everything on the table and seeing how
Yeah.
they respond. It's more like a test.
Yeah.
I really don't actually have a lot of empathy for racist mental health care
Yeah.
professionals because, and I think that we as Black people are very empathetic, understanding people. We are.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, after
Absolutely.
everything that's happened to us, and continues to happen to us, we
Right.
still are kind, giving people the benefit of the doubt. But I think if you want to show empathy, fine. But if you're feeling like, I don't want to show empathy to this racist therapist, I'm upset because of how they treated my child, I'm
Absolutely.
going to leave space for those people too, because you don't need to show them empathy. They don't need, who
Absolutely.
needs empathy as your child?
Yes,
That is
absolutely.
the person who needs the empathy.
Absolutely.
They're an adult, they're getting paid, they
Absolutely.
signed up for this, right?
Right. And to
So,
clarify my comment, I
yeah.
meant that the clinicians should be leading with empathy, and if they're not, that's a clear red flag. That's where I
Oh,
was.
yeah, the clinicians,
That's
not
what
the
I was.
not the
Just to
parent.
clarify.
I thought you meant the parent having empathy for the
Oh
clinician.
no,
They
no,
don't need
absolutely not.
empathy. Okay, we're on the same page then, yeah. So then maybe you're not nicer than me. I like it, because I was gonna say they don't need empathy. They need
I was like, when
accountability.
I started this, I was like, wait, no,
We're
no,
on
no,
the same.
no.
We're on the same page. Then they need accountability. Yeah,
Yeah,
and yeah,
absolutely.
they should exactly. So yeah, they should respond with empathy, and be really, really dedicated to rectifying that relationship, because
Right.
therapeutic, as they call it, like, there can be miscommunication. There can be sort of angst in the
Yeah.
therapy. So that's something that I should add too. Therapy is often not comfortable,
Mhm.
right? And it's important to know, you know, you may have instances where you don't really like the approach of the therapist. You disagree with the therapist, right? All those things can be normal in therapy. Your child
Mhm.
doesn't want to go to therapy because they don't feel like talking about, whatever is upsetting to them that day. All those things are normal for
Yes.
therapy. What's not okay is when you bring up these things with your therapist and they're responding in a way that you find to be offensive, or the way that they're delivering their differences in opinion or whatever it is in a way that you find to be offensive. Because they might bring up something about your child or propose something about your child that you don't agree with, right?
Mhm.
And that is okay to have disagreements, or for you to say, no, I don't really think it is this, I think it's that. All of that, I think, is normal. And I think probably that those types of things come up in therapy. It's a normal disagreement, but I think when you sort of have those interactions with the person, and we as Black people, we kind of have a radar, we kind of have a
Yeah,
detector, you kind of know when
absolutely.
something is off. It's
Right.
in the lack of eye contact, the lack of a firm handshake, the lack of
Yeah.
warmth, the way they describe things, the
Even eye
intangible
contact,
things.
even
Exactly.
listening and showing those signs of like, I care what you're talking about right now. All those things are being distracted.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. So go with my take home is go with your gut. And just very quickly about the inpatient. So in the hospital.
Yes.
So if you have a child who ends up being hospitalized on the psychiatric unit, if your child is old enough, which most children are, it's important to call them and check in with them and see how they're doing, and ask them, how are you being treated? How are things going? And just if the child is older, a teenager, just really sharing with them, hey, similar to how you do when they're in school, when
Yeah.
they're in the general public, hey, you're a Black child, sometimes you're going to be treated differently. If anything happens that makes you feel uncomfortable and you feel is racist, let me know. Let dad know, let mom know, let
Yeah.
grandma know, whoever is the person who's checking in with them, because then you open it up to your child to share those things. Because what I found about racism too is, and we know this as adults, it's humiliating. It's
Yes.
some of the experiences are very humiliating. You feel demeaned,
Absolutely.
you feel dehumanized, and sometimes you just want it to go away. You don't want to talk about it. And it's important to let kids know, it's like, okay, we don't have to go into the details right now, but we do need to know as your parents what's going on so we can help you. So, a couple things to keep in mind with inside the hospital is, for a lot of hospitals, you actually can access the notes that are being written about your child. That's important. You
Okay.
want to look and see how your child is being written about. If you're
Mm,
seeing words like violent, um, aggressive, words that rub you the wrong way about your child, manipulative, those are ways that Black children, as many of you know, are described. It happens in the hospital too. That's something to
yeah.
bring attention of, the person who's in charge of the unit and say, I'm not okay with the way my child is described. So I do recommend getting access to your child's notes so you can see what's going on, so you can see what medications they're being given, and you can ask questions. Why did you give my child this medication? What is this for? Why did they need an extra medication? All of those things, you should be able to ask as many questions as you want. Who is this staff member that's writing about my
Yeah.
child in this way? So advocating for your child, you should definitely do. And then the second thing is, sometimes in hospitals, and this sounds scary, but it does happen, children have to be physically restrained. And so
Mm.
for the parents that have children that ends up happening to, it's important to know that there are racist differences in that too. Black
Mm.
children, I recently co-authored a study that was published, are more likely to be physically restrained than white children. So
Wow.
when your child is restrained, you want to know about it, and it will be in the notes. And if you have any questions about why or how or whatever, bring those to the attention of the physician taking care of you, and potentially arcing it up if you feel like something has happened that you feel like is inappropriate for your child. Because if it's appropriate management, and I've had to put in orders to
Yeah.
restrain children. However, when I talk to parents, I'm quite comfortable with explaining to the parents why it happened. It's a
Right.
last resort. It's your
Right.
child was trying to hurt himself. They were trying to hurt somebody else. So for safety, I had to. And here's
Yeah.
why. They should be able to clearly explain it to you. There should be no defensiveness and anger and anything like that. But you, as
Yeah.
the parent, unfortunately, I think as Black parents, we have to be extra vigilant.
Right.
So read those notes. If you don't feel comfortable reading them, or you feel like you want someone else, get someone in your family, a friend, to read those notes. You can actually give friends and different family members access to notes as well. But it's important for us to just keep an eye on things, because unfortunately Black children do experience differences in the way that they're cared for. Sometimes it's fine, and sometimes they're treated fine, and I agree with
Yeah.
the treatment, but sometimes it's not. And it's almost like rolling the dice. So you as a parent, you as a caretaker, do not be afraid to question things. I think we've been conditioned sometimes
Yeah.
to not question things.
Right. Absolutely. That point about getting access to the notes is major. I don't know if that's just something I didn't know, but I didn't know it. I had no clue that that was something that parents could request. That's such a really good resource, and they should be able to just ask that directly from the provider.
Yeah. So it kind of depends on the hospital system. And I believe starting next month, actually, a law is being passed that patients, and I'm sure their guardians or parents, have full access to all the notes. So depending on the hospital
Also.
system you're in, there's different levels of like what you can see. The hospital system I work in, though, which is at Yale, parents can see the notes written about them. So written about their child, excuse me. So you just ask, how do I get access to the notes that are written about my child? What are what's your protocol in the hospital? How do I get access to what's going on? Because you want to know what's being written about your child and what's happening on a daily basis in this inpatient psychiatric unit. Because unlike outpatient care outside of the hospital, your child is there and you're not there physically with them. So you need to know. Another thing that happens is hate speech. Racist hate speech
Mm.
is happening a lot in inpatient psychiatric units. My Black patients being called the N word and no
Wow.
intervention happening. So it's important to talk to your child,
Yeah.
and depending on their age, depending on how sensitive they are, you could say things like, did anybody call you any names that you felt that made you feel uncomfortable? Right.
Hmm.
Were you treated well? How were the other kids in the unit? Did anybody call you anything or make you feel uncomfortable? Did any staff member make you feel uncomfortable? Who
Yeah.
was it? Right. So don't be afraid to ask your child those questions. Because again, if it does happen, some kids may just tell their parents, and
Mm.
some kids may feel ashamed. Like, they don't know, maybe this is supposed to happen. I've never been in
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
psychiatric. Maybe that kid is sick and it's okay they call me the N word. No, it's not okay,
Yeah.
obviously.
Absolutely. That's such a good segue, right? And we talked, earlier, like when we had the conversation about the empathy part, and you said something really good there. You said that in that situation, it's our kids that need the empathy, right?
Mhm.
So, and this is, we'll get you out of here on this question, but if we have a young person, a child that does experience that does experience that racism, whether it be inpatient, outpatient, and now they're wrestling with it, as adults, like, how do we support? Like, how can we support them having experienced that? Because I think any of us that are black can probably we could do a whole episode of, like, what was a racist experience that you had when you were a kid, that
Right.
when you were younger? Like, we've all experienced those things, and, like, like you said, some of it leads to other stuff, and some of it just sticks with you, not necessarily in a I had depressive symptoms, but it's like I won't forget it. I'll
Right.
never forget this experience. Like, it will always stick with me. Or I didn't even know what to call it at the time, but when I got older, I was like, oh, that was racist. I didn't have the vocabulary to say it at the time. And so, like, how do we support our young people if they've experienced something like this?
Yeah, so I think it sort of depends on the age, obviously, to a certain extent. So you want to the the first thing to do is, if a child has experienced something and they're sort of aware of it. So there's two different levels, right? So, and I'm oversimplifying it. Sometimes this stuff is happening to your child, right? Like, let's say you look into a chart and you
Mhm.
see, similar to, like, let's say you're at a parent teacher conference, right? And your
Sure.
teacher is describing your child as like manipulative. And you're like, oh heck no, don't do that
Right.
again child. So there's
Yeah.
stuff like that where you might look in your patient notes, and that may be an adult to adult conversation because your
Sure.
child may be unaware that they're being described that way, or maybe someone
Yeah.
calls them manipulative and they're kind of like, huh, okay. So
Right.
in those instances, I think it's okay to sort of, you know, to let the child, you can let your child know, like, mom or dad or grandma, we don't like the way that person described you, and leave it at that. And then have that discussion with the adult, and handle it
Sure.
that way. But I think if the child has been targeted by something that they clearly are aware of. So for example, someone has made fun of their skin tone, their hair texture, called
Yeah.
them the N word, that type of stuff. It's really important to validate those feelings and acknowledge them and say, it's
Mhm.
okay for you to have feelings about this. Let's talk about how you feel about that. It also is important for your child to see that you're doing something about it. So I think
Right.
it's okay to show a little bit of anger, to show a little bit of urgency at responding to it. I'm sure you can all remember as children, if you had a parent or a caretaker where something kind of happened with another adult or a child, and you kind of didn't realize it was as serious as it was, but you sort of
Yeah.
saw your parents spring into action, right? And you were
Right.
like, oh, dang, okay, this was bad.
Right.
I don't think that's a bad thing for kids to see you upset. So I think sometimes parents will think that they're shielding their kids from that by not showing them their own emotions. I think it's okay to say, to show them, I'm going to call and I'm going to talk to them about this. This is not okay. This happened to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, showing them that you do have urgency, and showing them that it's actually a very big deal to you as well. And then also just having them discuss their feelings around it, and kids are different. Some kids will be very upfront with their feelings, and they'll be angry, upset, sad. Some kids may say, oh, it's okay, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And they're not okay, and so sometimes just having check-ins with your child and saying, like, this is wrong, that this is racism, and this happened because
Yeah.
some people in this world don't like people with brown skin and hair like yours. And then following it up with positive
Mhm.
affirmation and empowerment. I mean, our Black children need, and parents know this, but really need empowerment. So if you've
Yeah.
had something racist happen to you, it's hard to sometimes not internalize it and feel like, well, am I lesser than because my hair is curly, or am I lesser than because I have because I have brown skin? So it's important to then, once you sort of acknowledge this was a bad thing, follow it up with, and your hair is beautiful, your skin is
Yeah.
beautiful, Black people are wonderful, and actually helping
Absolutely.
them to feel proud and powerful and empowered about being Black and their Blackness, and letting them know, like, you know white people may tell you or may give you messages that white people are better than you, and it's not true. Here are
Right.
all these things that black people have done. Here's what your family members have done. So all these types of things to
Right.
make them feel proud of being black. What I usually do with my kids in the hospital is if they have been targeted by racist sort of racist statements and things. So there was an instance with a little boy, again, he was young,
Mhm.
um, really little, like 8 or 9, had a white peer not only call him the N word, but also make fun of his skin tone. That's why you have dark skin. It's why you're the only black kid on the
Yeah.
unit. So what I did is, on top of saying this is not okay, this is racist, I would make sure, because he loved to draw, that I always drew all of my people as brown. And
Yeah.
I would talk about how
Yeah.
beautiful this dark brown shade is. And I would say, I'm going to pick this. And he's like, really? Because, obviously I'm light skinned. And he's like, why are you choosing that? I said, because this is beautiful. All
Yeah.
shades of brown are beautiful, and that's my favorite color. Brown is my favorite color. And here's why I'm going to use it. So sometimes even that modeling for you as an adult is so powerful for children, because unlike what a lot of messages that white children get passively and actively, that whiteness and sort of features associated with whiteness are beautiful, we sometimes don't get that as black children. So we
Absolutely.
have to kind of supplement it by giving them those experiences. So I think a combination of really being clear that it was wrong, that it's racist, and that it's not okay. And then 2, following it up with sort of empowerment and building up their confidence has been, what I found has been helpful so far in my experience.
That positivity and those affirmations are so important at that time. Just that rebuilding of, like, I love that you said, like, this is what people in your family has done. Like, it doesn't have to be, it's not distant, it's not away from you, it's not something far-fetched or that happened in the past. This is active, this is a part of you, this is within your bloodline. Like, I think those messages for our kids are definitely really powerful. And
Yeah, I
so,
actually, one of my cousins, it was actually, you know, pretty disturbing, actually. So she's actually biracial. So,
uh,
her mother's white, her dad is black, my cousin. And
yeah,
she essentially came to me one day and said, I wish I had blonde hair. And I said,
mhm,
why? She's got, dark brown hair, curly. And I
yeah,
said, why? And she said, oh, because, it's prettier. And I don't think so. I said, I love curly brown hair. This is my favorite.
yeah,
It's my favorite hair, and if I could pick any hair in the world, I'd choose brown hair, and I choose brown eyes. She said she wanted blue eyes too, and she's like, "Really?" And I said,
yeah,
"Yeah. Why would I want blue eyes when I have these beautiful brown eyes?" I started naming all these different things that are brown. I said,
yeah,
"It's brown like my favorite cup of coffee. It's brown like the beautiful earth that things come from. It's brown, so all these like
yeah,
hot, because if you think about it, we don't get a lot of positive messages about brown eyes and
yeah,
brown skin, but there's a lot of
for sure.
positive messages if you pay attention about blue eyes
Blind,
and
yeah,
blonde hair,
absolutely.
right? But we don't really think about it, until but kids are getting these constant messages. So sometimes even just, modeling stuff like that, and being proud, you as like a black parent, a black relative, and you talking about how you like their brown skin or their brown eyes, or how you like your brown skin or your brown eyes, and how that's your first choice. It's not
Yeah,
that you want to be white, right? Because
yeah.
that underlying narrative still of
It's
white
real.
is everybody should aspire to be white. And
Yeah,
it's hard to not internalize that as a black person, especially a black child, when
yes.
you don't know what's happening. You don't quite get it until later. And even
Yeah,
then, I think we as black adults still often struggle with self-confidence and loving ourselves and
sure.
self-love. So we know it's a journey for us. It's definitely a journey for kids. So really just modeling that, teaching them about their, like I said, their family history, teaching them positive, associations with brown eyes, and not having to say, oh, you need to have, light brown eyes or green eyes, or
Right.
no, dark brown eyes are beautiful. Dark brown hair, just as it is beautiful. We need,
Absolutely.
need more of that.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. And so our time is about up. I wanted, because of all the things that you're doing, I would love to link to that study that you referenced that you published earlier. I would love to link that in the video. Um, Tell folks how to get connected to you, the things that you have going on, how they can hear more from you. Like, let folks know how to get connected with you.
Yeah, so I write a lot for the general press. I've been published in like Time Magazine, Washington Post. You can really just actually Google me, Amanda Calhoun, Yale, and a lot of my pieces will come up. So I write a lot about racism and mental health care. Racism, my focus is on Black people. So I write a lot about anti Black racism and what I think about it. You can follow me on Twitter. My handle is Amanda Joy, Joy MD, and that's the same name on Instagram as well. And so I post a lot of my content, my articles that I'm writing, talks that I do. And you can also go to my website, which is www.amandajoymd.com. So same kind of name. And I post, presentations, articles, different things. And you can also contact me through my website as well. If you have questions or have, speaking engagements, you're interested in me doing presentations, whatever it may be. So would love to connect. And yeah, I do a lot of ranting on Twitter. So yeah.
Don't we all?
Fun, right? Someone's just got to let it out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's an honor to have you on. I'm so happy that we connected, that we got to meet in person a few weeks ago. And so I just want to say on behalf of all of the people that you work with, all the advocacy that you do, all the really putting yourself out there, because that's, intense too. Like you talked about, there is such a thing as backlash, and we've, been victim of it so many times, of things that have happened in rooms where we weren't there, all because we wanted to stick up for our people. And so I want to say thank you on behalf of everyone that you come in contact with and the systems that you work to impact. We appreciate everything that you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And yes, there will always be haters, as all of you know. There are a lot of people who do not want to encounter a Black person who's speaking truth to power. And it makes me
Absolutely.
very angry to see a Black person doing that. And hey, guess what? It's okay. Because at the end of the day, my goal is not to be liked by racist people. My goal is to advocate for our children. And so when I keep that in mind, and when I see smiles on the children's faces that who I help and their parents, and they feel respected and validated and seen, to me, that's a win. And all those angry people can continue being angry in the background.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks so much for having me, Brandon.
No problem. No problem. We'll connect soon. And to everyone else, we'll see you for the rest of the week.